Ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to begin. Sal, please go ahead.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. This is Sal Salamone, Executive Editor at Ziff Davis Enterprise, and welcome to today's eSeminar, Best Practices for Balancing Disk and Tape Storage. We'll be talking about the evolving role of disk and tape in the data center today. As everyone knows, there's a lot of conflicting and occurrences going on right now. There's massive explosion in data that needs to be stored. There's pressure to rein in costs of any type of IT solution. And then it's complicated when we get to data storage with data retention and compliance issues. And these are some of the topics that we'll be discussing today. We'll be joined by Debbie Beach, who is the Director of Silvatica Consultants. Hi, Debbie. How are you?
Hi, Sal. I'm fine, thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. And throughout this presentation, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So we ask you, if you'd like to participate, you can send us a question at any time using the Ask a Question feature on your console, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. And to get things going, get everybody involved to start, we're going to start with a couple of poll questions. So why don't we push out the first poll now? Okay, so to participate in the polls, you have to disable your pop-up blockers. And the first poll is, which of the following best describes the data backup system in your storage environment? So you have four choices: disk-to-disk backup system, tape backup system, a combination of disk-to-disk and tape, or none of the above. So while people are voting on this, I just want to remind you about a couple of housekeeping rules. As I mentioned already, ask questions throughout. We want this to be participatory. At the end of the presentation, you'll be able to download a copy of the slides. So if you want to pay attention and not be scribbling notes throughout, you'll at least have copies after. And hopefully this will be, we'll take an hour of your time, and we'll get you out of here within the hour. And hopefully it'll be a educational event. All right, so we've had enough, I think we've had enough time for that. Now why don't we push out the second poll? Okay, with this, which of the following best describes your use of tape both now and within the next year? So will you be use tape? Will you use tape already, but will increase its use? You use tape, but you'll be decreasing its use. You use tape, and it will remain static. You don't use tape, but you will begin to use it. Or you don't use tape, and you don't anticipate using it. And why don't we take a few seconds? We'll let people vote on that. Okay, so now, why don't we, Debbie, why don't you join us now? And
Yes.
I'm going to chime in every once in a while, reminding folks to ask questions, but I'm going to leave this in your hands for the next few minutes.
Lovely, thank you. So, again, my name is Debbie Beach, and I'm the Director of Silvatica Consultants based here in the UK. Today I'm going to be drawing on 20 years of experience of working in the data protection industry, both in large multinationals and small to medium-sized businesses, in order to talk to you about the evolving role of disk and tape in the data center. You'll no doubt be aware, and Sal's already mentioned it, of the long and ongoing debate around which one of these technologies, disk or tape, is best for data protection. I'm not intending to enter that debate today. Instead, in talking through some best practices, I'm aiming to show you that it's not a question of disk or tape, but of disk and tape, and where each one best fits as part of a robust data protection strategy. I've written a white paper that accompanies this presentation, and it's available from the LTO website. The URL will be listed on my last slide. So, in brief, I'm going to talk about how storage technologies have continued to keep pace with exponential data growth, then how 5 sets of best practice can help guide decisions, before looking at when to select disk and when tape offers the best fit for purpose. And again, there's questions. This is an interactive event. Please feel free to send questions during the presentation. There will be time to answer them at the end. So let's begin. As you can see from the chart on this slide, data growth continues unabated. In fact, IDC expect a further tenfold increase over the next 5 years. And while the current economic climate is affecting many things, it appears to have no impact at all on the trend. This is because I think the commercial success of many companies today is dependent on increasingly data-rich applications. I can only guess at the size of databases held by Amazon or eBay, but even smaller companies now hold sizable data warehouses of products and customers and orders. This is in addition to multimedia business content that's often used to support the work of many of today's employees. And what's more, on top of that, we're required often to store this data over a number of years because of company or industry guidelines, or because of increasing amounts of government legislation. The bottom line is this ongoing exponential data growth is proving a challenge to even the most sophisticated of businesses. One of the biggest concerns is around the infrastructure cost to store and manage all this data. And therefore, simply adding more storage capacity is no longer an acceptable strategy. The question becomes, just how can we use storage technology to keep pace in a sensible way? So before I answer that, let's look at how storage has already evolved to keep pace with this data growth. So since 1960s, when disk drives looked like washing machines and tape reels were the size of bicycle wheels, storage has clearly continued to evolve, no longer that big for a start-off. Until recently, there were few architectural choices to be made. Consequently, both disk and tape systems were deployed in parallel, as this image shows. Disk was used for primary storage and tape for secondary data protection, which included backup, disaster recovery, and archival. However, over the last decade in particular, there's been a rapid evolution in the capabilities of both of these technologies. And the result for us has been greater flexibility and more choice. So in 2009, we find that high performance continues to ensure disk's place, the choice for primary storage, as shown in the line on the bottom of the chart. And portability, low cost, and a long shelf life continue to position tape as the king of archival, positioned at the top of the chart. And while tape has continued to quietly evolve in terms of performance, capacity, reliability, and security features to meet today's data protection requirements, disk has been causing more of a stir. It's been hitting the headlines with lower disk prices and new technologies like virtualization, data deduplication, and low bandwidth replication of data. Disk is now a potential solution for data protection scenarios beyond the primary storage, a territory that was previously solely occupied by tape. So we now have an extended choice for both backup and disaster recovery, the middle two tiers. Both disk and tape are now available. But how do we choose? Well, there's a balanced equation to consider. On the one hand, there's the business requirements. For example, how fast do you need to get back up and running after you've lost your data? And on the other hand, there's the cost involved to maximize the return on asset of each of your storage devices. In my next few slides, I'm going to examine some best practices that can help us to make appropriate decisions in the context of the equation I've just mentioned. Best practice 1. My first best practice concerns the need to actively manage data, or in other words, to store it wisely. And while we'd guess that there's a lot of data that we store that remains untouched, the results of a 2007 study by the University of California at Santa Cruz really underline this fact. The research team there looked at the access patterns of business data stored on a typical NAS system. And their findings showed that the vast majority of information created and stored was never accessed again beyond 90 days of its creation. In fact, a full 90% was never accessed again, as you can see from the pie chart, and a further 7% was only accessed on one more occasion. In total, at least 3% of all data stored on that NAS system that was being regularly used. So keeping all this unutilized data on disk can be expensive, and as the study shows, it's probably unnecessary. Offloading or actively archiving older or less valuable data from disk to lower cost storage, like tape, can bring significant savings as well as performance improvements. In other words, not all data needs to be given first-class treatment. And while I understand it's not easy to figure out or implement an appropriate active archiving regime, the payback, if you can, is worth it. And so my question to you then is, how much money might your company save if able to archive off 90% of your online data to an offline position? My second best practice is about the fact that data protection is more than just taking a copy of your data. And if you ever doubted the importance of this, then the examples in this slide, I think, reinforce the point. Both JournalSpace, which was a US-based blogging service, and AVSIM, a UK-based online flight simulator company, believed that mirroring their data between disks or systems was sufficient for data protection. Well, it wasn't. While mirroring the data is an ideal solution for business continuity, should your primary server go down, on its own, it's not a safeguard. The data is still held online. And what this means is that any corruption to the primary data results in the mirroring of that corruption, whether accidentally or, as AVSIM experienced, possibly maliciously. Although both AVSIM and JournalSpace are now back in operation, both suffered significant business interruption as a result of their data loss, and of course not to mention the negative publicity they got as well. So best practice 2 then is about the need to implement tiers of storage, not only to help actively manage data through a life cycle, as I talked about in the first best practice, but to provide levels of protection from a wide range of threats. In this diagram, I'm showing a strategy used today by a manufacturing company for their 24/7 protection system. It's a real example, and I've chosen to share it with you as it not only illustrates my point about tiered storage, but also it's going to come on to some other best practices I'll be discussing. If we start from the very top of the diagram and work down, you can see that at level 0, the production system automatically collects real-time production data and stores it to primary disk. The production data is stored onto the primary disk. Then the IT manager at this company has implemented a mirrored disk system as his first level of data protection, taking an instant mirror of the production data so that should the production system go down, he can quickly switch the mirror and resume production. So in this example, level 1 protection is focused on uptime and business continuity. But unlike JournalSpace and AVSIM, the manager here has other levels of protection. So we go down to level 2, backup. For this production system, he's made sure that at the end of each day, or for every 24 hours worth of data, an interim backup is taken from the mirrored system to a tape library. By doing it this way, the backup doesn't impact the system's performance. Then, should there be a corruption to the primary data and consequently to the mirrored system, the company only has about 24 hours of production data at most at risk. At the end of each week, a full backup is made, again from the mirrored system, and the tapes are removed off-site for disaster recovery. That's the level 3 of protection. So should there be a fire or a flood at the plant, they can retrieve the data from the previous week. And then finally, in the 4th level, data is actively archived to tape and kept for over a year in a storage vault. The main system is only retaining a week's worth of production data at any one time. Now, I understand that this model won't work for all companies. It's probably unnecessarily complicated, but it serves to show how technologies can combine to safeguard your data from multiple threats. There are many other benefits to this approach, and I hope that will become clearer through my next best practice to do with risk mitigation. So best practice 3 is probably the most crucial of all. It's about managing the risk to your data, and I recommend the following checklist of points. Firstly, making multiple copies, and I suggest at least 3, with grandfather, father, and son being the most common scheme in use. It usually applies to taking and keeping at least a daily, a weekly, and a monthly backup copy. And I'd also suggest using a mixture of storage media, perhaps disk and tape, to avoid any contamination from individual products or technologies. Then, at least 1 copy needs to be held remotely from the data center. Well, exactly where it's going to be held needs to be down to you, the level of risk you're prepared to take for your location. But certainly, it should be held away from your data center, so that if there's a case of fire, floods, or earthquake, a copy of your business data remains unharmed. Finally, and importantly, bearing in mind the earlier examples, you need to hold your data offline. If Journal Space had taken a tape backup copy the previous evening, the database could have been restored to that point. It would have been embarrassing for them, but not catastrophic. If Absim had held a backup copy of their system on tape, hackers could not have reached it, and the system could have been quickly and completely restored. So when all is said and done, storing a copy of data to tape provides a cost-effective way of being able to take data offline and easily remove it to an off-site location. It's all about how much risk you're willing to take. Similar to driving a car, it's not just about how well you drive, but often about circumstances that are beyond your control, like the weather or other drivers on the road. Our data needs to be able to withstand the threat of human error, hardware or software failure, natural disasters, and even malicious attacks from viruses or hackers. As with all risks, levels of protection need to be balanced by the cost you're prepared to pay. I'd always recommend that you build in as many safety features as you can sensibly afford. And that leads me to the next best practice, which is about controlling costs. So managing the total cost of ownership, or the storage TCO, where acquisition costs are only the tip of an iceberg, or the top of my pyramid in this case. The TCO you're prepared to accept may well vary over the life cycle of your data. That is, you can probably live with paying a bit more for your active data, but you won't want to pay as much for the data that you want to store in archive. A recent data archiving TCO study by the Clipper Group looked at the cost of storing data over a 5-year period, comparing a SATA disk system with an LTO-4 tape library system for long-term data retention. They factored in acquisition costs of equipment and media, as well as electricity and data center floor space. And Clipper found that the total cost of the SATA disk archiving solutions, as a result, were up to 23 times more expensive than the tape solutions. But that's not the whole story. When calculating energy costs for the competing approaches, the costs for disk were up to 290 times that of tape. That's because, unlike tape, disk needs constant power to keep spinning and may also need additional energy for cooling. The Clipper Group suggests that this is like keeping a car idling on your drive overnight. And it would seem like madness, yet it's what we're doing by retaining inactive data on disk. And when you consider the earlier Santa Cruz study that it's likely that 95% of this data is never accessed again, that's a lot of money being spent for nothing. Tape, on the other hand, only needs power when data is being written to it or read from it. Other than that, it sits on a shelf or it's in a tape library. And it's not just about the cost, but about considering assurance of supply, because there are places in the world outside of large western and urban conurbations where utility companies won't be able to feed or supply data centers with sufficient power. One other aspect of the total cost of ownership concerns physical floor space, often at a premium in today's data center. Therefore, minimizing the footprint of storage can be an important cost consideration as well. Finally, there's the cost involved in managing storage. Here I'd suggest investing in consolidated and automated solutions can make a big difference. The amount of IT resources you require to manage it, and therefore the total cost of ownership. My fifth and final group of best practices concern the ability to restore your data, even when it's been archived for a long time. Firstly, implementing security. Every month we hear horror stories about loss or theft of sensitive data, from health records to tax and payroll information, and that's worldwide. Mounting legislation has made securing this data a new business imperative, and technologies such as data encryption are coming to the fore to help us to do that. Probably worth mentioning here that some technologies, such as LTO4, include hardware-based data encryption, securing data at the point it is written to tape without impacting system performance, or having to make additional investments in software and hardware encryption appliances. But regardless of how you secure your data, you also need to ensure that the media chosen has sufficient shelf life. And for this, tape is king. Media manufacturers are specifying up to 30 years for LTO media. And even then, it's important to create the right environment to store your media in terms of a secured location, probably under lock and key in a vault, and also the right ambient physical conditions, temperature and humidity. Before moving on to the next part then of the presentation, I just want to recap the 5 complementary best practices in data protection that I've talked about. Firstly, the need to store wisely. Actively managing your data, for example, by archiving off older and inactive files to less expensive storage media. Secondly, implementing tiers of storage for each aspect of the life cycle, providing multiple levels of defense, as we showed in that manufacturing scenario. Thirdly, mitigating risk by holding data on a variety of storage types, including copies held offline, isolated from system access, including errors and hackers, and off-site, away from the data center for disaster recovery purposes. Fourthly, considering the total cost of ownership beyond acquisition costs, including power and cooling, the cost of floor space, and the cost of management resources required. And finally, planning for the long term, making sure that data at rest can be restored even after a number of years. So how can disk and tape support the implementation of these best practices?
And I'm going to just jump in here for 1 second, Dilly. I just want to remind people to please keep submitting your questions. We have a few good ones that have already come in, and we'll have time at the end to go through them. So just a reminder, hit your Ask a Question button and submit your questions anytime throughout the presentation.
Okay. So you remember from the earlier on in the presentation that with continued storage evolution, we now have more choice and greater flexibility. I just want to take a few moments to highlight some of the evolutionary features that both technologies have undergone. For disk, there's been significant price reductions and technology enhancements that have led to the introduction of dedicated disk-based backup appliances and virtual tape libraries. We know those as VTLs. Maybe worth me explaining that VTLs are disk-based appliances that emulate tape, so they work easily with any systems or software that already support tape libraries. We'll be looking at the advantages and restrictions of virtual tape libraries later in this presentation. Many dedicated disk-based appliances and VTLs also offer data deduplication. This technology enhances disk storage efficiency, particularly for backup, by eliminating duplicate or redundant blocks of data in order to store more data on the same disk. Data deduplication has also allowed the introduction of low bandwidth data replication, providing lower cost transmission of backup data from one site to another via a WAN or a LAN. I think this feature can be particularly useful in allowing remote or branch offices to easily transmit their daily backups to a central data center. And then for tape, there's been an equal amount of evolution. And in fact, in terms of performance, it's probably been tape that's taken the greatest step forward. For example, today's LTO 4 drives have a native transfer rate of around 120 megabytes a second. What that means is they can stream up to 864 gigabytes of compressed data every hour. Actually, that's surpassing the backup speed of the majority of today's disk drives in streaming applications. Tape has also evolved in terms of capacity, with LTO 4 drives holding up to 1.6 terabytes of data. This is a huge evolution because that's 8 times the capacity of the first generation of LTO drive that was launched in 2000. Advances in tape library automation have also helped reduce management and media handling, and there has been new technology to enhance reliability and provide security features like hardware-based data encryption and worm tape. Yet despite these advances in tape, some would suggest that the evolution of disk has made tape redundant in the data center. And I want to disagree. I join with countless other industry commentators who argue that for many sensible reasons, some I've already outlined, this really isn't the case. The survey reported in the slide above provides additional evidence that tape continues to play its part. In response to one of the questions in the annual InfoStore reader survey, 3/4 of respondents indicated that they still use tape for data protection in one form or another. That is, they were either using tape on its own or, more often, combining it with disk to gain the best of both worlds, disk for faster restore performance and tape for lower cost archival. But how can you decide which technology or combination of technologies is best for your environment? Firstly, I recommend that you define service level agreements, SLAs, for each element of data protection, from backup to archival. And in defining your SLA, consider the following 4 key criteria. Firstly, recovery point objectives, or RPO. That is, how recent must the data be in order to minimize impact to your business? Can you live with yesterday's data, or data that's a few hours old? Or does it need to be completely up to date? Then there's the recovery time objective, RTO. How quickly do you need to get this type of data back? Will a few hours be okay, or a few minutes? Or is it critical to your business to be up and running again in an instant? Then there's the level of security you require. This includes considerations like how many copies do you need? How remotely do they need to be held? Does this data require encryption? And finally, importantly, the budget. How much can you afford to spend? Actually, this needs to be weighed up against the true cost of data loss to your company. How much can you afford to lose? Once you understand your requirements, again for backup, disaster recovery, and different forms of archival, both actively archiving and archiving for compliance purposes, it's easier then to compare the technology solutions for each step. Now, I appreciate there's a lot of detail in this slide. So let me just say, one, as Sal said, you can download the presentation afterwards, but also these tables are included in the white paper that's available on the LTO website. You might like to take a more detailed look later on. But I'm going to work through it column by column, and starting with column 1, looking at a disk-only solution, mirroring the data from a primary server. There's no doubt that this configuration provides the fastest recovery speeds, and by enabling instant mirroring the data, you always have an up-to-date copy, and you can switch to it if your primary server goes down. Perfect for business continuity. On the other hand, this solution's got a high cost of total cost of ownership. And what's more, the data remains online and on-site. It's open, therefore, to many of the same threats of accidental or intentional corruption as the primary system is. and that caused problems to AVSIM and journal space, and it's worth just remembering that. The bottom line is that on its own, disk mirroring doesn't provide a complete data protection solution. So in the next column, we look at disk-based backup products like virtual tape libraries, the VTLs. These dedicated backup appliances provide similar performance benefits to the traditional disk. And by emulating tape libraries, they provide consolidated, automated backup for multiple servers. Many of these appliances also offer greater storage efficiency with data deduplication, and they also enable data to be replicated off-site for disaster recovery. However, VTLs still have a higher cost per gigabyte than tape. Also, your data does still remain online, and the media is not physically portable off-site. It relies on data replication for disaster recovery. They can also appear more complex to use than ordinary tape libraries. Finally, in the third column, we look at tape drives and libraries. While tape is undoubtedly slower than disk for single-file restore, for large amounts of streaming data, tape can be equally as fast for backup. Furthermore, tape drives and libraries deliver the lowest total cost of ownership of any data protection solution. They also offer portability, long shelf life, ease of scalability, and the added security of being offline and potentially protected by data encryption. So then, when comparing technologies against our selection criteria, recovery time objective, RTO, recovery point objective, RPO, security levels, and budget, we can make decisions as follows. Firstly, for primary disk mirroring. When the recovery time and recovery point objectives are at their most demanding, disk mirroring provides a rapid business continuity solution. It's ideal for first-tier backup of mission-critical data. However, again, let me stress that this would need to be combined with backup to disk and or tape in order to provide for full data protection. Moving to the second column, if recovery within minutes is sufficient, then backup from primary disk to a dedicated disk-based backup system or a virtual tape library provides the necessary performance for first-tier backup from disk and rapid restore of files. These appliances also offer solutions for disaster recovery by using low bandwidth replication of data if it's required. But for longer-term data retention and archival, I'm still going to recommend offloading to tape. It's the more cost-effective solution. Finally, and in the last column, we look at data protection using tape drives or tape libraries. These provide an ideal solution when cost is a key criteria and when recovery time and recovery point are less of an issue. So for low-access data, tape can deliver a cost-effective first-tier backup of data directly from disk. Alternatively, it can provide second-tier backup in a disk-to-disk-to-tape configuration. Because tape is rugged and highly portable, it also offers high-volume data transport for off-site, useful for disaster recovery. And as I mentioned earlier, LTO tape manufacturers specify a 30-year shelf life. And by combining this with tape's low cost, high capacity, and a small footprint, we can see why tape remains the dominant solution today for long-term archival. However, in reality, it doesn't need to be an either-or decision, as I said at the very beginning. Combining the benefits of disk and tape in a disk-to-disk-to-tape or disk-to-VTL-to-tape architecture can often be the optimum solution, covering all aspects of both performance and data protection. And believe me, it's easier to implement than it is for me to say. This slide shows from the top, firstly, the disk mirroring of mission-critical data for business continuity. Then lower access data is backed up directly from the primary disk to the LTO tape, where it will be kept for disaster recovery and archival. In the meantime, on the right side of the diagram, the higher access data is backed up to a VTL system to provide faster restore of single files. This data then will be eventually offloaded to tape and removed off-site for archival and disaster recovery. So while this provides the performance, tape provides the last line of defense. So to summarize, there are a number of best practices to guide backup and archive strategies and technology choices. I would suggest that disk mirroring or VTL systems are selected to provide for the most stringent RPO recovery point objectives and RTO recovery time objectives and performance requirements, and that tape is selected for lower cost backup of low data access applications, or that it's combined with disk to provide offline, off-site, and potentially encrypted storage for a cost-effective disaster recovery and long-term archival solution. In conclusion, then, tape and disk are needed in a strategic blend to cover all aspects of a robust data protection strategy. It's not about whether to choose tape or whether to choose disk, but about combining them to meet business objectives for a cost-effective, dependable storage strategy for the long run that will contend with the ongoing exponential data growth we're facing today.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
So now we're going to move into the Q&A part of this in a second. A couple of things that I found it interesting. You've been following this area quite a bit, but the thing that always boggles the mind is the percent of data that's never accessed again. I think it was in the 90%, 95% range, after 90 days of creation. That's always a staggering number to me, and really, brings this whole issue home, I think. And the issue about energy use, I've really not seen that mentioned much before. I think that's pretty interesting about the cost of energy, basically just to keep the disk spinning all the time versus sort of on demand essentially with tape. Really interesting point. So thanks for a great presentation.
Thank you, Sal.
So I thought before we get into the formal Q&A, why don't we just look at one of the poll questions and just see how, I'd love to get your opinion on how this jives with, what you're seeing out there. So why don't we just look at the first poll again? That question, as for people can't remember, was we were asking, basically which solution are you using? Is it, only disk to disk? Is it tape backup or some sort of combination as your backup system? So we have the results put up here. 10% are using just disk to disk. About a third, a little more than a third, are using only tape, but the majority are using a combination. So is this what you're seeing? I was just curious, how does this jive with your, the clients you're talking to and the work you're looking at?
Yeah, I think this is pretty much spot on with what I'm seeing, Sal, in the marketplace, that people are trying to combine disk and tape to make the best of both. Yes.
Okay. So why don't we go, we've got a number of questions here. We'll get to as many as possible in the presentation. And if we can't get to your question, somebody will follow up with you after the seminar. So first one, let's see. Are there risks for using disk as an archive solution but leaving it offline and only powering it on for data recovery?
Just a second, Sal. I'm having a couple of technical concerns here. Got it. Sorted. Sorry.
And it's, are you all set? Or I was going to entertain the crowd. Oh, no.
Thank you. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Sure. First question is, are there risks for using disk as an archive solution but leaving it offline and only powering it on for data recovery?
Well, yes. To be honest, there are concerns with powering disk systems on and off. They typically need to remain spinning to provide data availability and technical efficiencies. However, there are made systems, massive arrays of independent disks, and they're designed to be powered on and off and can help reduce the energy consumption.
Okay.
However, I have to say that made disk systems are spinning. They are still susceptible to the intentional and unintentional corruption, just like any other of the online storage I've mentioned. So it's still not a permanent offline solution. It still doesn't have the ultimate protection of the offline storage away from anybody who can get to it.
Okay. Somebody wants to know, are there situations where tape alone is the best solution for backup?
Well, yes, indeed. Absolutely. Many organizations use tape for backup in a direct disk-to-tape scenario. And those reasons are really because, one, it's simple to implement, it's low cost, it's easy to manage, and it covers all of the data protection scenarios, backup, disaster recovery, and archival in one solution. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, that, if you back up, frequently accessed data direct to tape, the infrequently accessed data, then that is the most cost-effective solution.
Okay. We have time for a couple of more questions, and keep submitting them. Like I said, if we don't get to them all, somebody will contact you after. There's a couple of questions along sort of a similar theme about issues about long-term storage on tape. Can you just talk a little bit about that? I think, given the what we're comparing it to, I think the disk systems are swapped out fairly rapidly too. But could you just talk a little bit about that? As I said, some people are concerned about what's best practices there. Do you migrate it, or what are the long-term storage issues with tape?
Okay, so as I've said, tape manufacturers are specifying their media from anything between 15 years and 30 years, and it will depend on the technology you're using as to how long you can keep your data on the tape. Best practices there are making sure that your tapes are held in the right environment, so ambient physical storage conditions. It's also important to sort of check that data every now and again to make sure that it's still there. But it has the longest and proven shelf life, where other technologies and disk in particular, I believe, is specified somewhere around 5 and 10 years. Mm-hmm. So it depends on the length of time you want to store it. But you've also got to remember that when it's on tape and it's on a shelf or it's in your vault, it's a low total cost of ownership because you're not using energy. It's away, it's taken off site, you're not having to use energy to power it, just to write to it and to read from it. So you can put it somewhere safe and forget about it, essentially. So does that, I don't quite know what the question was, Sal. Does that answer it?
I think, from the way I read it, I think yes, it does. One more question and then we'll wrap up. Is the TCO equation leveled between disk and tape when you factor in data deduplication?
Right. Well, data deduplication is a great data reduction technology, and it really helps to conserve disk space. So it does improve the cost effectiveness of disk. However, if you look again at the Clipper Group study, and I think there's a copy of that available on the LTO website, if a VTL with 20-to-1 data deduplication reduction factor and data deduplication tends to work around a 20-to-1 reduction. If it was implemented, it would still be about 5 times the cost, I believe, of the tape system. Mm-hmm. But even if it was the same cost, the online dedupe data, again, this is the whole thing of my point about tiered storage, is that is still online data and it's still at risk. And so again, it's the best practices of moving that data. And even if it's efficient and even if it's low cost, it still isn't totally protected.
Okay. Well, I guess that's about all the time we have. We're going to have to wrap up. I really want to thank you. I appreciate you taking time out of your day. This has been very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everyone who's participated, everyone who's attended. Thank you for taking time out of your day. And before you go, a couple of things. You can download a copy of today's presentation. Before you leave, if you have a chance, please participate. We have a survey, and this helps us refine these web seminars. We always appreciate your feedback. If you're interested in seeing upcoming events, look at our calendar on the eSeminarsLive.com site. And then if you want to listen to this or refer a colleague to it, this presentation, this will be archived within a day, and you can go to the eSeminarsLive.com site and see an archived version of this. With that, I want again to thank Debbie for your time, thank everyone who participated. I want to thank the LTO program for sponsoring this. And for Ziff Davis Enterprise, this is Sal Salamone. Thank you.